The first snow of winter fell like gentle memories over Wilson's roadside diner. Eleanor Wilson Ellie to the locals watched it through the foggy window as she wiped down the same spot on the counter for the third time. The early morning light painted everything in hushed blues and grays, turning the Montana landscape into a watercolor of stillness. She glanced at the clock, 7:58 a.m. 2 minutes until the silent trucker might arrive. For 11 months now, every Friday morning at precisely 8:00 a.m., the same red Peterbilt would pull into the gravel lot, parking in the far corner beneath the crooked light post. The driver, a weathered man with eyes that had seen too many miles and not enough rest, would enter without fanfare, sit at the corner stool, and order coffee. Black, no sugar, no conversation beyond what was necessary. Ellie never asked his name. He never offered it. Yet every week, when he stood to leave, she would slide a brown paper bag across the counter, a sandwich, a slice of pie, a thermos of coffee. He would nod, not quite a smile, but something close to gratitude, and then he would be gone, swallowed by the endless ribbon of Highway 93 stretching north toward the Canadian border. Today marked the 48th Friday. Ellie had been counting. The clock ticked to 8:00 a.m. Ellie straightened her apron and tucked a strand of silver-streaked hair behind her ear. The habit was reflexive now, this preparation, this expectation. Outside, the snow continued to fall, heavy enough to muffle sound, but not enough to close roads. Not yet. Anyway, Montana winters had a way of turning treacherous without warning. 8:01, 8:02, 8:03. The red Peterbilt did not appear. Ellie poured coffee into a mug and set it at his usual spot anyway. Steam rose in lazy curls, dissipating like the certainty she had felt just moments before. By 8:15, the coffee had stopped steaming. By 8:30, it had gone cold. "You waiting on someone?" asked Dale Miller, a local rancher who came in every morning for breakfast before heading out to check his cattle. "No," Ellie lied, pouring the untouched coffee down the sink. "Just lost in thought." Dale nodded, knowing better than to press. Everyone in Pine Ridge knew about Ellie Wilson's past, how her husband Frank had jackknifed on the treacherous Bitterroot Mountains Pass 8 years ago. How she'd kept the diner running because it was all she had left of him. How she never quite smiled the same way afterward. They respected her space, her grief, her quiet determination to keep going. "Another storm's coming," Dale said instead, nodding toward the window. "They're saying it could be a big one. Might want to stock up." Ellie nodded. "I always do." After Dale left, she found herself staring at the brown paper bag she had prepared that morning. Roast beef sandwich with horseradish mayo, apple pie with extra cinnamon, thermos filled with coffee, black and strong the way the silent trucker liked it. The same meal she had packed 47 Fridays before, for the first time. She wondered if she had imagined the connection between them. Perhaps he had just been polite, accepting her offerings out of courtesy rather than need or desire. Perhaps the look in his eyes, the one that reminded her so much of Frank, had been a projection of her own loneliness, rather than a reflection of his. She slipped the bag into the refrigerator. Maybe he was just running late, but he didn't come the next Friday either, or the one after that, by the fourth missed Friday. Ellie found herself standing in the parking lot after closing, staring at the empty spot where his truck always parked. The February wind cut through her coat, but she barely noticed. Something had happened. People like him, quiet people. People of routine, they didn't just vanish without reason. "Where are you?" she whispered to the darkness. The wind offered no answers, just a promise of more snow. The dream started on the night of the fifth missed Friday. Ellie found herself walking through snow so deep it reached her waist. Ahead of her, barely visible through the swirling white, was the outline of a truck. She called out, but no sound escaped her lips. She pushed forward, her legs growing heavier with each step, the cold biting through to her bones. As she drew closer, she could see it was Frank's truck, the blue Kenworth he had driven for 20 years. But when she reached the driver's side door and pulled it open, it wasn't Frank sitting behind the wheel. It was the silent trucker, his weathered face pale and still, frost collecting on his eyelashes. "You're too late," he said, his voice like gravel. I'm already gone. Ellie woke with a gasp, her nightgown damp with sweat despite the chill in her bedroom. The digital clock on her nightstand read 3:17 a.m. Outside, snow fell in thick, relentless sheets. She didn't fall back asleep that night. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the storm, a decision forming in her mind like ice crystals on glass. The next morning, Ellie did something she hadn't done in 8 years. She closed the diner on a weekday. The handwritten sign on the door was brief, closed for personal reasons, back tomorrow. But it felt like a declaration of war against her own carefully constructed routine. She pulled Frank's old leather jacket from the hall closet, the collar still holding the ghost of his aftershave. The keys to her pickup truck felt foreign in her hand. She rarely drove anywhere besides the weekly trip to the grocery store in town. The diner was her world, her sanctuary, her prison. The truck protested with a grinding cough before the engine caught. 8 years old when Frank died. It was now pushing 16, but he had maintained it meticulously. "Treat her right," he used to say, "and she'll never leave you stranded." The irony wasn't lost on Ellie as she navigated the snow-covered roads heading north on Highway 93. She had a hunch nothing more that the silent trucker's route took him up toward the Blue Pine truck stop near the Canadian border. It was one of the few places that catered to long haulers in this stretch of Montana, offering showers, laundry, and a place to rest that wasn't the cramped cabin of a truck. The drive took nearly 3 hours, the roads growing progressively worse as she headed into the storm's path. Twice she nearly turned back, doubt creeping in like the cold through her coat. What was she doing, chasing after a stranger who had probably just found a different route, or a different job, or a different diner with better pie? But something deeper than logic pushed her forward. Something in his eyes those final weeks, a heaviness, a resignation, a farewell he couldn't voice. The Blue Pine truck stop appeared through the snow like a mirage, all neon and warmth against the stark white landscape. Ellie parked and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. What would she even say? How would she explain herself without sounding like a desperate, lonely old woman? The truth, she realized with a pang, was that she was exactly that. Inside, the truck stop buzzed with the controlled chaos of a small community. Drivers huddled over coffee and plates piled high with eggs and hash browns. The air smelled of bacon, diesel, and wet wool. Ellie stood just inside the door, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked, a 60-something woman in a worn jacket, hair windblown, cheeks flushed from cold and uncertainty. "You look like you could use some coffee, honey," said a voice to her right. Ellie turned to find an older woman behind the counter, hair dyed an improbable shade of red. Name tag reading Martha. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, each one carved by laughter or worry or both. "Coffee would be wonderful," Ellie managed, sliding onto a stool at the counter. Martha poured a mug and slid it across to her. "You're not a driver," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," Ellie confirmed. "I run a diner down in Pine Ridge. Wilson's." Martha nodded, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Frank Wilson's place. I knew him. Good man. Heard what happened. I'm sorry." Ellie nodded, the familiar ache blooming in her chest at the mention of Frank's name. "Thank you. So what brings you all the way up here in this weather must be important." Ellie wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, drawing warmth and courage from it. "I'm looking for someone, a driver, older gentleman, probably in his early 60s, weathered face, gray hair, drives a red Peterbilt with a dent in the right fender. Very quiet. He used to stop at my diner every Friday morning for almost a year, but he hasn't been by in over a month." Martha's expression shifted, something like recognition and then concern passing over her features. Tall fella eyes that make you think he's seen the end of the world and somehow lived to tell about it. Ellie's heart quickened. "Yes, that's him," Martha sighed, setting down the coffee pot she'd been holding. "That'd be James. James Harmon. James." The silent trucker had a name. Somehow. This simple fact made Ellie's mission seem both more real and more foolish. What right did she have to track down a man who had never even told her his name? He comes through here about once a week, Martha continued. Or he did. Haven't seen him in a while either. When was the last time? Ellie pressed. Martha thought for a moment. Must have been 5, maybe 6 weeks ago. He wasn't looking good. Pale. Thinner than usual. I asked if he was all right, and you know what he said. Ellie shook her head. Said he was slipping into the snow. Those were his exact words. Feels like I'm slipping into the snow, Martha, and I can't find purchase. I didn't know what to make of it then. Still don't. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran through Ellie. Slipping into the snow. The same words from her dream. Did he say where he was headed? Ellie asked, trying to keep her voice steady. No, but... Martha hesitated, then lowered her voice. He left something. Asked me to hold on to it. Said someone might come looking. She reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small manila envelope, yellowed and creased. Never said who might come, but I get the feeling it might be you. With trembling fingers, Ellie took the envelope. It was lightweight, containing what felt like a single sheet of paper. Her name wasn't on it. There was nothing to indicate it was meant for her at all. I shouldn't, she began. Honey, Martha interrupted gently. You drove 3 hours through a snowstorm to find a man who's been missing for over a month. I'd say that gives you some rights to whatever's in there. Ellie nodded, carefully opening the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, a map, hand-drawn in blue ink. It showed a winding road leading off Highway 93 into the Sapphire Mountains, with an X marking what appeared to be a cabin or structure of some kind, in the corner. Written in a steady hand. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone, but if you still want answers, this is where you'll find them. No signature, no explanation, just an invitation and a warning wrapped into one. Do you know what this is? Ellie asked, showing Martha the map. The older woman adjusted her glasses and studied it. That looks like the old logging road up near Sapphire Creek. There are a few cabins up there, mostly hunting lodges that nobody uses much anymore. It's pretty isolated, especially this time of year. Have you ever known James to go there? Martha shook her head. Can't say that I have, but James always was a private sort, kept to himself. Only reason I know his name at all is because he's been coming through here for years. She paused, studying Ellie's face. You care about him, don't you? The question caught Ellie off guard. Did she care about James Harmon? A man she'd exchanged perhaps 50 words with in a year. A man whose name she hadn't even known until minutes ago. I don't know him, she said finally. Not really, but yes, I think I do care. Martha nodded, as if this made perfect sense. That's how it is sometimes, especially for folks like us who've seen a bit of life. You recognize something in someone else, something familiar, something true, and that's all it takes. Ellie carefully folded the map and returned it to the envelope. Thank you for this, and for the coffee. You heading back now? Storm's getting worse. Ellie glanced out the window. The snow was falling harder now, visibility dropping by the minute. The sensible thing would be to turn around, head home, wait for better weather. But the map in her hand seemed to pulse with urgency. I think I need to find this place, she said. Martha frowned. That's at least another 2 hours from here. And that's in good weather. Road might not even be passable now. I have to try. The older woman studied her for a long moment, then sighed. At least take some food with you. And here, she scribbled on a notepad and tore off the page. That's my number. You call me when you get there. Or if you get stuck. I know some people in that area who could help if needed. Ellie accepted the number gratefully, tucking it into her pocket alongside the envelope. I will, thank you. Martha, as she turned to leave. Martha called after her. Ellie, be careful. Whatever you're hoping to find up there, just be prepared that it might not be what you're expecting. The warning followed Ellie out into the storm, settling between her shoulder blades like an icy hand. The road to Sapphire Creek was exactly as treacherous as Martha had warned. What began as a paved highway quickly deteriorated into a barely maintained Forest Service road. then into little more than a suggestion of a path winding up into the mountains. Ellie's truck struggled against the incline in the deepening snow, the chains on the tires providing just enough traction to keep moving forward. The map rested on the passenger seat, illuminated by the dim glow of the dashboard lights. She had studied it carefully before leaving the truck stop, memorizing the turns and landmarks as best she could, but in the whiteout conditions. Landmarks disappeared, and turns became guesswork. An hour into the mountain, the storm intensified. Snow fell in near horizontal sheets, driven by winds that buffeted the truck like invisible hands. Visibility dropped to mere feet, and Ellie's confidence went with it. She was lost, alone on a mountain in a blizzard, chasing a ghost. This was a mistake, she whispered to herself, knuckles white on the steering wheel, as if in response. The truck hit a patch of ice hidden beneath the snow. Ellie felt the back end begin to slide, the sickening sensation of losing control seizing her chest. She turned into the skid instinctively, one of Frank's many lessons, but the truck continued its sideways drift toward the edge of the road and the steep drop beyond. Time slowed. Stretching like taffy, Ellie saw Frank's face, heard his voice. If you start to slide, don't panic. Gentle pressure. Turn into it. Ride it out. The truck came to a stop just inches from the precipice, half buried in a snowbank. Ellie sat frozen, breath coming in shallow gasps, heart hammering against her ribs. It was several minutes before she could bring herself to try the engine again. It turned over once, twice, then died with a dispirited whine. No, 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 Ellie muttered, trying again. Nothing but a click and silence. She was stranded. The realization settled over her like the snow accumulating on the truck's hood. No cell service, night falling, temperature dropping. The elements that had taken Frank were now coming for her, and she had driven straight into their arms. Ellie rested her forehead against the steering wheel, allowing herself one moment of pure despair. Then, practicality, the same stubborn practicality that had kept her going for 8 years without Frank took over. She had emergency supplies in the truck, blankets, food, water, a flashlight. She could wait out the storm, and in the morning, someone would come looking. Martha would call for help when Ellie didn't check in. She would survive this, as darkness fell completely. Ellie wrapped herself in blankets and prepared for a long, cold night. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, seeking entry at every seam and crack of the aging truck. Snow continued to fall, gradually burying the vehicle, insulating it even as it entombed it. Ellie's thoughts turned to James Harmon. Had he faced a similar fate somewhere on this mountain? Was that what he meant by slipping into the snow? Had he known something was wrong with the road, with the weather, with himself, and was that why he had stopped coming to the diner? The questions circled like wolves around a campfire, keeping sleep at bay despite her exhaustion. She dozed fitfully, waking often to the sound of branches cracking under the weight of snow or the groan of metal contracting in the cold. It was during one such moment of wakefulness, deep in the heart of night, that Ellie heard it the low, distinctive rumble of an engine. At first, she thought she had imagined it a dream, a hallucination born of hope and hypothermia. But it grew louder, more insistent, until it was unmistakable. Somewhere nearby, a vehicle was moving through the storm. Ellie fumbled for the flashlight, hands clumsy with cold. She pointed it out the window, flicking it on and off in the universal signal for distress. Then she pressed the horn, the sound muffled by the snow but still audible. Please, she whispered, a prayer to whoever might be listening. Please see me. The engine sound grew closer, then seemed to stop. Had they passed by? Had they not seen her signals? Panic rose in Ellie's throat as silence fell again, broken only by the wind. Then, a beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the buried truck. Once, twice, a third time deliberate. Searching. Ellie pressed the horn again, longer this time. Desperate. The light fixed on her position, and then came the sound of crunching snow footsteps approaching. Ellie's relief was tinged with sudden caution. Who would be out in this weather? On this remote road, what if they meant her harm rather than help? A shadow appeared at the driver's side window, and Ellie tensed. The snow covering the glass made it impossible to see more than a vague outline. There was a scraping sound as the figure cleared some of the snow away. Then a tap on the glass. "Hello," called a voicemail, deep, concerned. "Anyone in there?" With trembling fingers. Ellie rolled down the window a few inches. Snow immediately blew in, stinging her face. The beam of a flashlight illuminated the cab, momentarily blinding her. When her vision cleared, she found herself looking into a face she had never seen before. Younger than she expected, perhaps in his 40s, with a beard frosted white with snow and eyes narrowed against the wind. "Are you all right, ma'am?" the stranger asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Yes," Ellie managed, teeth chattering. "My truck. It slid off the road. Won't start." The man nodded. "You're lucky I came along. Nobody uses this road much, especially not in weather like this." He paused, studying her. "You're not from around here, are you?" "Pine Ridge," Ellie said. "About 4 hours south." Surprise registered on the man's face. "That's a long way in this storm. Must be important." Ellie hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I'm looking for someone, a friend. I think he might be staying at a cabin up near Sapphire Creek." The stranger's expression changed subtly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight stiffening of his posture. "Not many cabins occupied up there this time of year. Who is it you're looking for?" "His name is James Harmon. Drives a red Peterbilt, older gentleman. Very quiet." The man was silent for a long moment, the only sound the howl of the wind and the creak of snow-laden branches. Finally, he spoke, his voice carefully neutral. "I know James." Ellie's heart leapt. "You do? Is he all right? Is he up here?" Another pause, longer this time. "Ma'am, I think you'd better come with me. It's not safe here, and this conversation shouldn't happen in a blizzard." She gestured to something behind him. "I've got a snowmobile. It's not far to my place. We can talk there and figure out what to do about your truck in the morning." Ellie hesitated. Every warning about not going with strangers flickered through her mind, but the alternative was freezing to death in Frank's truck, and somehow that seemed a greater betrayal than taking a risk on the kindness of a stranger. "All right," she said, gathering her purse and the small emergency bag she had packed. "Thank you." The man helped her through the deep snow to a snowmobile idling nearby, its headlight a lonely beacon in the darkness. "I'm Michael, by the way," he said as she settled behind him on the seat. "Michael Reed." "Eleanor Wilson," she replied. "Everyone calls me Ellie." Michael nodded, then revved the engine. "Hold on tight. Ellie, it's going to be a bumpy ride." As they sped through the night, snow stinging her face despite the helmet Michael had given her, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed some invisible threshold. Whatever answers awaited her at the end of this journey, they would change everything. Michael's place turned out to be a substantial log cabin nestled in a small clearing. Protected from the worst of the wind by a stand of tall pines, a generator hummed somewhere out back, providing electricity that glowed warm and inviting from the windows. Inside, it was blessedly warm. A wood stove radiated heat from one corner, and the space was comfortably furnished with a mixture of handcrafted wooden pieces and well-worn leather. It looked lived in, cared for, not a temporary shelter, but a home. "Let me take your coat," Michael offered, hanging it alongside his own on pegs by the door. "Have a seat by the fire. I'll make some coffee." Ellie sank gratefully into an armchair near the stove, feeling sensation painfully returning to her extremities as the heat penetrated her frozen bones. She looked around, taking in details, books lining shelves along one wall, photographs in simple frames, a guitar leaning in one corner. No television that she could see, but a radio sat on a side table, currently silent. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked as Michael returned with 2 steaming mugs. "About 10 years, he replied, handing her one of the mugs before settling into the chair opposite. "I was a park ranger before that. Decided I preferred solitude to bureaucracy. He took a sip of his coffee, watching her over the rim. Now, you want to tell me what brings a diner owner from Pine Ridge all the way up this mountain in the middle of a blizzard, looking for James Harmon? Ellie cradled the mug in her hands, gathering her thoughts. The story sounded foolish, even in her own mind. How would it sound spoken aloud? He's been coming to my diner every Friday morning for almost a year, she began slowly. Always sits in the same spot, orders the same thing, doesn't talk much. I started packing him meals to take with him. It became a routine, I guess. She paused, feeling the inadequacy of her words. Then about 5 weeks ago, he stopped coming. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. She looked up, expecting to see judgment or confusion on Michael's face. Instead, she found something closer to compassion, mixed with what might have been resignation. "And you came looking for him," he said. It wasn't a question. "It sounds crazy, I know. We barely spoke a dozen sentences to each other in all that time, but—" She trailed off, unsure how to explain the connection she had felt, the absence that had driven her up a mountain in a blizzard. "But you recognized something in him," Michael finished for her. "Something familiar, something that reminded you of yourself, or someone you lost." Ellie looked up sharply. "Yes. How did you know?" Michael's smile was sad. "Because that's how James is. He carries a kind of gravity with him. People are drawn to it, especially people who understand loss." He set down his mug and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "How much do you know about him?" "Almost nothing. I didn't even know his name until today. A woman at the Blue Pine truck stop told me Martha. She gave me this." Ellie reached into her pocket and pulled out the manila envelope with the hand-drawn map. Michael took it, examining the map with a frown. "James gave you this?" "Not exactly. He left it with Martha. She said he told her someone might come looking, and she thought it might be me." Michael sat back, running a hand through his beard. "That sounds like James. Always 10 steps ahead, planning for contingencies most people wouldn't even consider." He handed the map back to Ellie. "This leads to his cabin. It's about 3 miles from here, deeper into the mountains." "So he is up here," Ellie said, hope rising in her voice. "Is he all right?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Michael seemed to weigh his words carefully before responding. "Mrs. Wilson, Ellie, please." "Ellie, I think before I answer that, I should tell you something about James. Something that might help explain why he stopped coming to your diner." He paused as if gathering courage. "James and I served together. Army, Desert Storm. We weren't close then, different units, different missions, but we recognized each other years later when I moved up here, and he was passing through. Started talking, found out we had more in common than just military service." Ellie listened, puzzled by this unexpected revelation but sensing its importance. James was a trucker before the Army, became one again after. It suited him, the solitude, the constant motion. He never stayed in one place too long, never formed attachments. Not until 8 years ago. 8 years. The number resonated through Ellie like a bell tone. 8 years since Frank's accident. "What happened 8 years ago?" she asked, though something in her already knew the answer. Michael met her gaze steadily. "He was driving through the Bitterroot Mountains. Bad storm, worse than this one. Came around a bend and saw a truck that had gone off the road, a blue Kenworth, jackknifed across the guardrail, cab dangling over the edge of a 300-foot drop." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. The mug slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, coffee spilling across the wooden floor. Neither of them moved to clean it up. "Frank?" she whispered. Michael nodded. "Your husband, I'm guessing." James never knew his name. "Not then." He stopped, tried to help. The driver was still alive, but barely, pinned in the cab, bleeding badly. James tried to get him out, but the truck was unstable, shifting with every movement. The driver knew he wasn't going to make it. He asked James for one thing. "What?" Ellie's voice was barely audible. "To check on his wife, make sure she was okay. Said she ran a diner called Wilson's in Pine Ridge, Montana. Made James promise. The room seemed to tilt around Ellie, past and present colliding with dizzying force. So all this time, all these Fridays, he was keeping a promise to Frank. Yes and no. Michael stood, moving to a small desk in the corner. He opened a drawer and removed a leather-bound journal, bringing it back to Ellie. James started checking on you right after the accident. Just drove by the diner at first, making sure it was still open, that you were still there. Then, about a year ago, he started stopping in, sitting at the counter, watching you, making sure you were really okay. Not just going through the motions. He handed her the journal. This is his. He left it with me the last time I saw him. Said I'd know when to give it to someone. I think that someone is you. With trembling hands, Ellie opened the journal. Inside, in neat, precise handwriting, were dated entries spanning 8 years. She flipped to one at random, dated 3 years after Frank's death, April 18th. Drove by Wilson's Diner again. Eleanor was outside, planting flowers in window boxes, same ones as last spring petunias, purple and white. She looks tired but determined. Diner seems busy. Sign needs repainting. Thought about stopping in, but not ready yet. Not sure if I'll ever be. How do you tell someone you watched her husband die? Tears blurred Ellie's vision. She turned to a more recent entry. Dated just over a year ago, February 12th. Sat at the counter today. First time inside. She didn't recognize me. Of course. Why would she? Ordered coffee. Black. She has Frank's eyes, same shade of blue, same directness. Noticed his picture behind the counter. Found myself staring at it too long. Need to be more careful. And another. From 6 months ago, July 30th. She started packing meals for me today. Don't know why. Didn't ask for it. Tried to pay, but she refused. Something about the gesture broke something open inside me. First time I've cried since that day on the mountain. Waited until I was 50 miles away. Pulled over on a service road where no one could see. What right do I have to her kindness? What right do I have to any of this? The final entry was dated just over 5 weeks ago, January 10th. Doctor confirmed it today. Stage 4, spread to the lungs, liver, bones, 3 to 6 months. He says, feels like some cosmic joke surviving war, surviving the roads all these years, only to be eaten from the inside out. Can't go back to the diner now. Can't let her watch another trucker die. Left the map with Martha. If Eleanor comes looking and something tells me she might, at least she'll have answers. I owe her that much. I owe Frank that much. Ellie closed the journal, her heart a battlefield of contradicting emotions. Grief, anger, gratitude, confusion. The silent trucker. James had been a connection to Frank all this time, a living link to his final moments, and she had never known. He's dying, she said flatly, the words falling like stones. Michael nodded, his expression grave. Cancer, advanced. He came up here to, well, to face it on his own terms, away from hospitals, away from pitying glances, just him and the mountains. And you let him. There was an edge to Ellie's voice now, a spark of anger breaking through the shock. James makes his own choices, always has. Michael's voice was gentle but firm. He didn't want intervention, didn't want treatment that would only buy him a few painful months. He wanted peace. I respected that. Where is he now? Is he? Ellie couldn't bring herself to finish the question. He's still at his cabin. As far as I know, I check on him every few days. Bring supplies. He was alive yesterday. Michael glanced toward the window, where the storm continued to rage. But in this weather, I can't get there until morning. Ellie stood, suddenly decisive. I need to see him. Not tonight, Michael said firmly. The trail is dangerous enough in daylight. In a blizzard, at night suicide. We'll go first thing tomorrow, I promise. Ellie wanted to argue, but exhaustion suddenly crashed over her like a wave. The emotional revelations, The physical ordeal of the journey, the bone-deep cold that still lingered despite the cabin's warmth, it all conspired to drain the fight from her. "First light," she insisted. Michael nodded. "First light." He showed her to a small guest room. "For the rare occasions I have visitors," and left her with extra blankets and a flannel nightgown that had belonged to his sister, alone. Ellie sat on the edge of the bed. James's journal still clutched in her hands. 8 years. For 8 years. This man had carried the weight of her husband's final moments, had kept a promise to a dying stranger, had watched over her from a distance and then from the corner stool of her diner, and now he was dying too, slipping away into the snow just as Frank had. Outside, the blizzard howled, a white fury that separated her from James by mere miles that might as well be light years. Ellie opened the journal again, hungry for more glimpses of this man who had known Frank in his final moments, who had carried a piece of him all these years. As she read entry after entry, James's observations of her diner, her resilience, her quiet grief, a strange sensation grew within her, the feeling of being known, truly known, by someone who had witnessed her life from the outside in. It was disconcerting and comforting in equal measure. In the final pages of the journal, Ellie found something unexpected, a letter, folded and addressed to her in the same neat handwriting, with shaking fingers. She opened it. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, then you found your way to the mountain, and Michael has decided it's time for you to know the truth. I'm sorry for the deception, for the years of silence, for taking the coward's way out by disappearing without explanation. I was there when Frank died. I held his hand. I promised him I would make sure you were all right. At first, that meant just checking on the diner, making sure it stayed open, that you were surviving. But as the years passed, I found myself drawn to your strength, your quiet determination to keep going in the face of loss. I recognized something in you that I recognized in myself, the ability to carry on when carrying on seems impossible. I never intended to become a regular at your diner. I certainly never intended for you to show me kindness I didn't deserve. Each meal you packed for me was both a gift and a burden, a reminder of my failure to save Frank, of the secret I kept from you. Now I find myself facing my own end, and I can't bear the thought of you watching another trucker fade away. So I came here, to the mountains, to face whatever comes next on my own terms. I don't expect forgiveness for my silence. I don't expect anything at all. But if you've come this far, there's one last thing I need to tell you. Something I couldn't bring myself to write in the journal. Frank's last words weren't about pain or fear. They were about you. Tell Ellie I'll see her in the next life, he said. Tell her the best years were the ones with her. I never delivered that message, and it's the greatest regret of my life, perhaps, in finally writing it down. I can find some measure of peace, with respect and admiration. James Harmon. Ellie clutched the letter to her chest, tears flowing freely now. Outside, the storm began to abate, the howling wind softening to a low moan. In the sudden quiet, she could hear the tick of a clock from somewhere in the cabin, marking the seconds, the minutes, the hours until dawn, until she could look into the eyes of the man who had held her husband's hand as he died, who had carried his final words for 8 long years, who had watched over her from a distance and then from the corner stool of her diner, until she could face whatever waited for her at the cabin in the snow. Morning came with an eerie stillness. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Trees bowed under the weight of snow. Drifts piled higher than fence posts, the world rendered in blinding white. Ellie hadn't slept. She'd spent the night reading and rereading James's journal, absorbing 8 years of observations, reflections, and unspoken connection. By dawn, she felt she knew James Harmon better than she knew most of the people who had been coming to her diner for decades. Michael was already up when she emerged from the guest room, brewing coffee and checking weather reports on a battery-powered radio. He looked up when she entered, taking in her drawn face and the journal still clutched in her hand. "You read it all," he said. Not a question. Ellie nodded. Thank you for giving it to me. Coffee, please." They drank in silence, the weight of the day ahead settling around them. Finally, Michael spoke. "Trails should be passable on snowmobiles. It's about a 30-minute ride to James's cabin. We should head out soon if we want to make it there and back before dark." "I'm ready whenever you are," Ellie said, her voice steadier than she felt. They dressed in layers, Michael lending Ellie additional gear to protect against the cold and pack supplies, extra blankets, thermoses of hot soup, medical supplies that Michael didn't explain and Ellie didn't ask about. Outside, the snowmobiles waited, already checked and fueled. Ellie settled behind Michael on one of them, wrapping her arms around his waist as they set off into the glittering white wilderness. The journey passed in a blur of white and blue snow and sky merging at the horizon, trees standing like sentinels along the trail. Ellie's thoughts were elsewhere, rehearsing what she would say to James when she saw him, wondering if he would be angry that she had come, if he would even be conscious, if she was already too late. They rounded a bend, and suddenly, nestled in a small clearing, stood a cabin similar to Michael's but smaller, more weathered. Smoke rose in a thin column from the chimney. Someone was inside. Someone had lit a fire. Ellie's heart leapt into her throat. Michael cut the engine, and the silence of the mountain rushed in to fill the void. "We're here," he said simply. They approached the cabin slowly, Michael leading the way through snow that reached mid-thigh in places. Before they reached the door, it opened, and a figure appeared in the doorway. For a moment, Ellie thought it was James. The height was right, the broad shoulders. But as they drew closer, she realized it was a woman, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that seemed familiar somehow. The woman studied them warily, one hand resting protectively on her abdomen, which, Ellie now noticed, was swollen with late-term pregnancy. "Michael," the woman acknowledged with a nod. Her gaze shifted to Ellie, curious but guarded. "Who's this one, Sarah? This is Eleanor Wilson, from Pine Ridge. She's been looking for your father." Sarah. The name triggered a memory from the journal's scattered references to a daughter James rarely saw. A relationship fractured by absence and misunderstanding. "Mrs. Wilson," Sarah said, recognition dawning in her eyes. "You're the one who packed the meals." "Yes," Ellie confirmed, suddenly uncertain. Is James?" "He's inside," Sarah said, stepping back from the doorway. "He's having a good day, all things considered. He might even be expecting you." The interior of the cabin was warm and dim, lit by a combination of firelight and the muted winter sunlight filtering through small windows. It smelled of wood smoke and pine, and something medicinal that Ellie recognized from her own mother's final illness. And there, propped up on a narrow bed in the corner, was the silent trucker. James Harmon looked both exactly as she remembered and completely transformed. The weathered face, the deep-set eyes that had seen too many miles, these were the same. But he was thinner now, much thinner. His skin stretched tight over the bones of his face, his once powerful frame diminished beneath blankets and quilts. Yet when he saw her, something flickered in those eyes: recognition, warmth, and something that might have been relief. "Eleanor Wilson," he said, his voice raspy but stronger than she had expected. "You found me." Ellie moved toward him, suddenly aware that Michael and Sarah had discreetly withdrawn, closing the door behind them to give them privacy. "You left a map," she said, stopping at the foot of his bed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Wasn't sure you'd follow it." "I wasn't sure either." Ellie hesitated, then added softly, "I read your journal. Michael gave it to me." James closed his eyes briefly, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. "Then you know. About Frank. About why you came to the diner." "Yes. I should have told you sooner." His eyes opened, meeting hers directly. "I was a coward." Ellie shook her head. "No, you were keeping a promise, in your own way." She moved closer, settling into a chair beside the bed. Up close, the ravages of his illness were even more apparent, the yellow tinge to his skin, the labored breath, the tremor in his hands. Why didn't you tell me you were sick? She asked. Why just disappear? James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window where snow glittered in the sunlight. I've watched what grief does to people. What it did to you after Frank. What it did to my daughter after her mother died. He looked back at Ellie. I didn't want to be another ghost haunting your diner. So you thought it was better to just vanish to leave me wondering. I thought it would be easier that way. Cleaner. He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Apparently, I underestimated your stubbornness. Despite everything, Ellie found herself smiling back. Frank always said it was my best and worst quality. At the mention of Frank's name, something shifted in James's expression, a deepening, a softening. He loved you very much. Those last moments, when most men would be thinking of themselves, he was thinking of you. Ellie swallowed hard against the lump forming in her throat. Your letter said that he'd see you in the next life, that the best years were with you. James nodded. Those were his exact words. I should have told you years ago. I just didn't know how. Thank you for telling me now. Ellie reached out hesitantly, then placed her hand over his. His skin was cool and papery, the bones prominent beneath. It means more than you know. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and James's slightly labored breathing. Outside, the shadows lengthened as the winter sun began its early descent. Your daughter, Ellie said finally. She's beautiful and expecting. James's face softened. Sarah? Yes, due in about a month. They tell me. A boy. His voice caught slightly. She's naming him Frank. Ellie's head snapped up. Frank, but why? Because I told her about him, about what happened on the mountain, about how his last act in this world was to make me promise to look after his wife. James's eyes held hers steadily. She thought it was a name worth honoring. Something clicked into place in Ellie's mind, a piece of a puzzle she hadn't even realized she was solving. Sarah's mother. When did she pass? 12 years ago. Cancer, like me. Sarah was just 18. She blamed me for not being there enough, for always being on the road. She was right. He sighed. After what happened with Frank, I tried to make amends, tried to be more present. It's taken time, but we're finding our way back to each other. And the baby's father, a shadow passed over James's face. Not in the picture. Sarah's better off without him. Ellie nodded, understanding more than was said. They lapsed into silence again, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have moved beyond the need for constant words. As the light outside began to fade, Michael knocked softly and entered, Sarah behind him. We should think about heading back soon, he said gently. Storm front's moving in again tonight. Ellie looked at James, reluctant to leave now that she had finally found him. I can stay, she offered. Help Sarah with... No, James interrupted, his voice firm. Michael's right. The mountain's no place for you in another storm. Besides, he added with a wan smile, I'm not going anywhere just yet. Too stubborn to die in a hurry. Sarah made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. That's one way to put it. Ellie stood, still holding James's hand. I'll come back, she promised. When the weather clears. James nodded, but something in his eyes suggested he didn't expect to see her again. The meals, he said suddenly. The ones you packed for me every Friday. What about them? I never ate them. At least, not most of them. At Ellie's puzzled look. He continued. There's a veterans shelter in Great Falls. I dropped them off there on my way through. Seemed wrong to keep them to myself when others needed them more. Ellie felt a surge of warmth toward this complicated man who had carried so many secrets for so long. When I come back, I'll bring enough for everyone, she promised, as they prepared to leave. Sarah pulled Ellie aside. Thank you, she said softly, for coming all this way, for the kindness you showed him this past year. It meant a lot to him, though he'd never say so. How did you know about the meals? Ellie asked. Curious. Sarah smiled. He called me every Friday after leaving your diner. Told me what you'd packed, how the diner looked, what the weather was like in Pine Ridge. It became our ritual, the one constant in our relationship. Through you, we found our way back to each other. Before Ellie could respond, Michael appeared at the door, gesturing that it was time to go. With one last look at James the silent trucker, her husband's final companion, her unexpected connection to a past she thought lost forever, Ellie followed Michael out into the gathering dusk. As they rode back through the deepening shadows, the first flakes of a new storm beginning to fall around them, Ellie found herself thinking of the brown paper bags she had packed every Friday for nearly a year. She had thought she was feeding a lonely trucker. Instead, she had been feeding a promise, a connection, a story that had begun on the day her world ended and was still unfolding in ways she could never have imagined. Behind them, in a cabin growing smaller with distance, a man who had held her husband's hand as he died watched the mountains swallow his visitors, wondering if he would live to see the spring, wondering if Eleanor Wilson would indeed return, wondering if, in some small way, he had finally kept his promise to the man in the blue Kenworth. And ahead of them, a storm was gathering strength, preparing to test them all once more. The journey back to Michael's cabin was a race against the darkening sky. What had been mere flurries when they left James's place quickly intensified into something more ominous fat. Heavy flakes that reduced visibility and accumulated with alarming speed. Ellie clung to Michael's back as the snowmobile carved through fresh powder, her mind still at the cabin they'd left behind, with the dying man who had carried her husband's final words for 8 long years. By the time they reached Michael's clearing, twilight had surrendered to full darkness, and the wind had risen to a mournful howl. "Just in time," Michael said, guiding Ellie inside with a hand at her elbow. "Another hour and we'd have been stuck." The warmth of the cabin enveloped them, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. Ellie removed her borrowed gear mechanically, her movements slow and distracted. The revelations of the day had left her emotionally depleted, hollowed out in a way she hadn't experienced since the immediate aftermath of Frank's death. Michael busied himself rebuilding the fire and preparing a simple meal, seemingly understanding her need for silence. It wasn't until they were seated at his small wooden table with bowls of venison stew that he spoke again. "You're thinking about James." Ellie looked up from her untouched food. "And Sarah, and the baby." She shook her head slowly. "It's all so unexpected." "Life usually is," Michael replied, breaking off a piece of crusty bread. "Especially up here in the mountains. Isolation has a way of distilling things down to their essence, stripping away pretense. Forcing honesty. Is that why you stay for the honesty?" A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Among other reasons." He studied her face. "What will you do now?" The question hung between them, weighty with implication. What would she do? Return to Pine Ridge and her diner, to the routine that had sustained her for 8 years, or remain here, near James, near this unexpected connection to Frank? Until what? "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me feels I should stay, be here for James in whatever time he has left. But another part is afraid," Michael finished for her, "of watching another death, of opening yourself up to that pain again." Ellie nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Yes, James wouldn't want you to stay out of obligation." "Annie," Michael's voice was gentle but firm, "that's why he left in the first place, to spare you exactly that." "It's not just obligation," Ellie protested. "It's—" She struggled to articulate the complex tangle of emotions James's revelation had unleashed. He was there when Frank died. He heard his last words, felt his last breath. "He's carrying a piece of Frank that I never got to have. And you think if you stay close to James, you're somehow staying close to Frank," Michael said, insight sharpening his gaze. Ellie looked away, unable to deny the truth in his words. "Is that so terrible?" "No, it's human." Michael pushed back from the table, moving to the window where snow now pelted the glass in earnest. "But James isn't Frank, and whatever answers you're seeking, they won't be found at a dying man's bedside." A flare of anger rose in Ellie's chest. You don't know what I'm seeking. Michael turned back to her, his expression softening. Don't I? I've spent 10 years up here watching people come to the mountains looking for something. Escape, redemption, closure. The wilderness draws them like moths to flame, promising answers to questions they can barely articulate. He paused. What are you really looking for? Ellie. The question pierced her, direct and unavoidable. What was she looking for? What had driven her up a mountain in a blizzard in search of a man she barely knew? Peace, she whispered finally. I thought I'd found it, running the diner, keeping Frank's memory alive. But when James stopped coming, she shook her head. It opened something up again, a wound I thought had healed. Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. The hardest truth about grief is that it never really ends. It just changes shape, becomes something you can carry without being crushed by it. Is that why you're here, because of grief? For a moment, Michael's face clouded, revealing depths of pain he usually kept well hidden. In a manner of speaking, I lost someone too. My wife, Rebecca. Car accident, 12 years ago. I was driving. He turned back to the window, his reflection ghostly against the darkness beyond. After the funeral, I couldn't bear to be around people, their pity, their awkward attempts at comfort. So I came here, meant to stay a month. Been here ever since. Ellie felt a surge of kinship with this solitary man who had pulled her from the storm. Does it help the isolation? Someday, Michael's smile was tinged with sadness. Other days, it just gives the ghost more room to roam. Outside, the storm's intensity increased, wind battering the cabin with renewed fury. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. Generator might not hold out all night, Michael observed. Best finish our meal while we can still see it. They ate in companionable silence, the shared understanding of loss creating a bond between them that transcended their brief acquaintance. As Ellie helped clear the dishes, a sudden thought struck her. My truck, it's still out there on the road. We'll dig it out when the storm passes, Michael assured her. Might take a couple of days. Roads won't be plowed until then anyway. I should call Martha at the truck stop. Let her know I'm safe, and I need to call my diner. Have someone put up a sign? Michael gestured to a satellite phone mounted on the wall. Reception spotty in a storm like this, but you're welcome to try. The call to Martha connected after several attempts, the older woman's relief palpable even through the staticky connection. Thank God, she said. Was about to send out search and rescue. Did you find him? Yes, Ellie confirmed. He's not well, but he's alive. And you're safe, somewhere warm. I'm at Michael Reed's cabin. Do you know him? Mountain Mike, sure. Good man. You stay put until this blows over. You here, I'll let folks at the diner know you're okay. Ellie thanked her, then hesitated. Martha, did you know about James and my husband? The line crackled with static. When Martha's voice returned, it was softer. Suspected something. James would get this look when he talked about your diner, like he was carrying something heavy. Never pressed him on it. Though some burdens folks need to carry their own way. After hanging up, Ellie turned to find Michael watching her with an unreadable expression. What? She asked. Just thinking about how strange life is, he replied. All these connections we never see until they're right in front of us. James and Frank. You and James. Now you and me. And Sarah, Ellie added. And the baby. Yes, Michael agreed. The next generation, life continuing its cycle. The generator chose that moment to sputter and die, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by the orange glow of the wood stove. Michael moved with practiced ease, lighting oil lamps that cast long shadows across the walls. Better get some rest, he suggested. Tomorrow's likely to be a long day. In the guest room, Ellie lay awake listening to the storm rage outside. Her thoughts churned like the wind-driven snow circling back to James, to Frank, to the unexpected connections that had drawn her to this mountain. And beneath it all, a growing certainty that her journey was far from over, that the answers she sought still lay ahead. waiting to be uncovered like landmarks emerging from a blizzard. Morning arrived with an eerie stillness. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed world, trees bent beneath the weight of snow, drifts piled against the cabin walls, the landscape rendered in blinding white brilliance beneath a clear blue sky. Ellie awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of a radio crackling with weather reports and road closures. In the kitchen, she found Michael studying a map spread across the table, his expression concerned. "Everything all right?" she asked, accepting the mug he offered. "Storm dropped over 3 feet in some areas," he replied. "Roads to town are impassable for at least 2 days, maybe longer, and there's another system moving in from the northwest." He tapped the map. "We've got a small window to check on James and Sarah before it hits." Something in his tone triggered alarm in Ellie's chest. "You're worried about them?" Michael nodded. "James's generator is older than mine, less reliable, and Sarah's pregnancy. It's not ideal to have her stranded in these conditions." "Then we should go now," Ellie said, already setting down her coffee. 20 minutes later, they were cutting through pristine snow on the trail to James's cabin. The journey took longer than the day before, the fresh powder deeper and more resistant by the time the cabin came into view. The morning was half gone. Ellie's first indication that something was wrong came from the absence of smoke from the chimney. Her second came from the darkened windows. No lamplight visible despite the dimness inside that the bright snow outside would necessitate. Michael accelerated, bringing the snowmobile to a stop just yards from the door. Before Ellie could even dismount, the door swung open to reveal Sarah, wrapped in multiple layers, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Thank God you came," she called, relief evident in her voice. "Generator died last night. We've been trying to keep warm with just the fireplace, but the wood's running low." Michael was already moving toward the cabin. Ellie close behind, inside. The temperature was barely warmer than outside. James sat propped in his bed, bundled in every blanket the cabin seemed to possess, his face gray with cold and discomfort. "Quite the welcome party," he rasped as they entered, attempting a smile that did little to mask his deteriorated condition. "How long has the generator been out?" Michael asked, immediately moving to examine the wood supply beside the fireplace. "Since about midnight," Sarah replied, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "We were about to try hiking to your place when we heard the snowmobile." Ellie went to James, taking his hand between hers. His skin was like ice, his fingers barely returning her squeeze. "You're freezing," she murmured, concern tightening her chest. "Been worse places," James replied. "Desert storm." Now that was extreme temperatures. Despite his attempt at levity, Ellie could see the strain in his face, the effort it took to speak. She turned to Michael, who was already conferring with Sarah in low tones. "We need to get them to my cabin," he said, meeting Ellie's gaze. "It's not safe here with another storm coming and no heat." "Can James travel?" Ellie asked, glancing at the frail man beside her. Michael hesitated. "It'll be rough, but staying here would be riskier." "I can travel," James interjected, his voice stronger than Ellie expected. "Been moving all my life. No reason to stop now." The preparations were swift but careful. Michael and Ellie gathered what supplies and personal items seemed essential while Sarah helped James dress in multiple layers. Despite his insistence that he could manage, it was clear the effort of simply sitting upright taxed his strength considerably. "We'll take it slow," Michael assured him as he and Ellie supported James to the door. "Ellie will ride with you on my snowmobile. I'll take Sarah on the other one. Just hold on to Ellie and let her do the steering." Outside, the sun had already begun its winter descent, shadows lengthening across the snow. To the northwest, clouds gathered on the horizon, the leading edge of the approaching storm. They needed to reach Michael's cabin before those clouds arrived, bringing with them wind and snow and temperatures that would drop well below zero after nightfall. The journey was arduous. James, despite his determination, could barely maintain his grip around Ellie's waist. Twice they had to stop to rest, each break filling Ellie with growing anxiety as she watched the storm clouds advancing and felt James's strength ebbing. "Not much further," she encouraged him during their second stop, helping him sip water from a thermos. Just over that ridge and down into the clearing. James nodded, too exhausted for words. His face had taken on a bluish tinge that frightened Ellie. But there was nothing to do except continue forward. The final stretch to Michael's cabin seemed to stretch endlessly. When they finally arrived, the first snowflakes of the new storm were beginning to fall, carried on a wind that cut through their layers like a knife. Inside, Michael worked quickly to build up the fire while Ellie and Sarah helped James to the sofa nearest the hearth. As warmth gradually returned to the cabin, color slowly came back to James's face. But the journey had clearly depleted what little reserves he had left. "You should rest," Ellie told him, tucking blankets around his thin frame. "Been resting? My whole life," James replied. His breathing labored. "Time's too short now for more rest." Sarah, who had been arranging pillows behind her father, paused at his words. Her eyes met Ellie's over James's head, a silent communication passing between them, the shared understanding that the end was approaching more rapidly than either had anticipated, as if sensing their thoughts. James reached for both their hands. "No sad faces," he admonished gently. "I've had a good run, better than most. Seen more sunrises from a truck cab than most people see in a lifetime." Ellie squeezed his hand, finding no words adequate to the moment. Outside, the storm gathered strength, wind beginning to moan around the eaves of the cabin. Michael, returning from stoking the generator, paused in the doorway, his expression grave as he surveyed the scene. "Storm's moving in faster than expected," he reported. "Could be 3 days before it passes completely." "3 days," Sarah echoed, one hand moving unconsciously to her abdomen. Something in her tone caught Ellie's attention. She studied the younger woman more closely, noting the tightness around her eyes, the slight hunch of her posture. "Sarah," she said quietly, "how are you feeling?" "Really?" Sarah hesitated, glancing at her father before answering. "I've been having some pain. Since last night. Nothing regular. Just uncomfortable." "What kind of pain?" Ellie pressed, maternal instinct sharpening her focus. "Low, like pressure, and my back." Sarah straightened, wincing slightly. "It comes and goes." Alarm flared in Ellie's chest. She had never had children of her own, but she'd helped enough neighbors and customers through pregnancies to recognize the signs. "How far along are you, exactly?" 37 weeks, Sarah admitted. "But the doctor said first babies usually come late." Ellie exchanged a glance with Michael, whose expression confirmed her suspicions. The baby wasn't waiting for the storm to pass. "Let's get you comfortable," Ellie said, rising to guide Sarah to the bedroom. "I think we should time these uncomfortable feelings, just to be safe." As they left the room, Ellie heard James murmur to Michael, history repeating itself, snowstorm, isolation, life and death hanging in the balance. Then, more softly, "At least this time, there might be a beginning to balance the ending." In the bedroom, Ellie helped Sarah change into more comfortable clothes and settle onto the bed. The younger woman's fear was palpable, radiating from her in waves that made her hands tremble and her voice catch. "I'm not ready," she confessed as Ellie arranged pillows behind her back. "I thought I had more time to prepare, to make peace with doing this alone." "You're not alone," Ellie assured her. Sitting on the edge of the bed, "You have your father, and Michael, and me." "For how long?" Sarah's voice broke. "Dad is dying. You and Michael are strangers. Once this storm passes, you'll go back to your lives, and I'll be left with a newborn and no one to help me figure out how to be a mother." The raw vulnerability in her words struck Ellie deeply. She recognized in Sarah's fear the same isolation she had felt after Frank's death, the terror of facing an uncertain future without the support she had counted on. "Where were you planning to go after the baby's birth?" Ellie asked gently. Sarah shrugged, wiping at her eyes. "I have an apartment in Missoula. It's small, but it's something. I've been staying with Dad since his diagnosis, trying to make up for lost time." Her face crumpled. "And now time's running out." Ellie took Sarah's hand, feeling the connection between them strengthening with each shared confidence. "Tell me about the baby's father," she suggested. hoping to distract Sarah from her immediate fears. A shadow crossed the younger woman's face. Not much to tell. Keith was a mistake. We worked together at the university library, dated for a few months. When I told him about the baby, he made it clear he wasn't interested in fatherhood. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. His loss, right. Absolutely his loss, Ellie confirmed, squeezing Sarah's hand. Dad wanted to go find him, have a talk, as he put it, even as sick as he was. He was ready to drive to Missoula and defend my honor. Sarah's smile turned genuine at the memory. I told him the baby and I would be fine on our own, that we didn't need a man who didn't want us. You're stronger than you know, Ellie told her. That strength will serve you well as a mother. Sarah's reply was cut short by a grimace, her hand tightening around Ellie's as her body tensed. Ellie watched the second hand on her watch, counting silently until Sarah relaxed again. 45 seconds, she noted. How long since the last one? Maybe 20 minutes, Sarah guessed, looking uncertain. We should start timing them properly, Ellie suggested, trying to keep her voice casual despite the concern building within her. First babies often took their time, but they were snowed in, miles from the nearest hospital, with a major storm bearing down on them. The next contraction came 18 minutes later, lasting nearly a minute. Sarah's grip on Ellie's hand tightened painfully, her breath coming in short gasps until the pain subsided. This isn't right, she panted once she could speak again. It's too early. The baby's not due for 3 more weeks. Babies have their own schedules, Ellie soothed, though her own worry was mounting. Let me check with Michael, see what supplies we have. In the main room, she found Michael and James in quiet conversation, their heads bent together like old friends sharing secrets. They looked up as she entered, both reading the concern on her face. It's starting, isn't it? James asked, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Ellie nodded. Early stages still, contractions about 18 minutes apart, lasting around a minute. Could be hours yet, maybe even a day. Or it could speed up, Michael said, rising to check the medical supplies he'd gathered on the table. First babies are unpredictable. Do we have what we need? Ellie asked, surveying the modest collection: clean towels, scissors, string, a first aid kit. Basics, Michael confirmed. I've delivered calves and foals in my time, but never a human baby. I have, Ellie said, surprising herself almost as much as the men. My neighbor's daughter, back in Pine Ridge, 6 years ago. Snowstorm then, too. She managed a small smile. Seems to be a pattern in my life. James studied her with newfound respect. You continue to surprise me, Eleanor Wilson. Call me Ellie, she replied automatically. Only the tax collector calls me Eleanor. A ghost of a smile touched James's lips. Ellie, then. Their eyes held for a moment, an understanding passing between them that transcended words. Then Ellie turned back to the supplies, mentally inventorying what else they might need for the birth that now seemed inevitable. Boil water, she instructed Michael. Lots of it, and find every clean sheet and towel you have. We'll need to sterilize these scissors, and the string for the cord, as Michael moved to comply. Ellie returned to Sarah, finding her curled on her side, face contorted in pain. This contraction was coming just 15 minutes after the last. Things were progressing faster than Ellie had anticipated. Breathe through it, she encouraged, rubbing Sarah's back in slow circles. That's it. In through the nose, out through the mouth. When the contraction passed, Sarah looked up at Ellie with tear-filled eyes. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, Ellie acknowledged, brushing damp hair from Sarah's forehead. But you're not alone. I'll be right here with you, every step of the way. Promise, promise. Outside, the storm had arrived in full force, wind howling around the cabin like a living thing seeking entry. Snow pummeled the windows, reducing visibility to nothing beyond the glass. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls as 3 people prepared to welcome new life, while a 4th prepared to leave it. The hours that followed took on a dreamlike quality for Ellie, the rhythmic timing of contractions, the soothing words offered to Sarah, the quiet preparations for what was to come. James insisted on being present despite his weakness, settling into a chair near the bedroom door where he could hear everything but wouldn't be in the way. "It's my grandchild," he said simply when Ellie suggested he might want to rest instead. "I might not get another chance to be here for Sarah. I missed too much already." As evening deepened into night, Sarah's labor intensified. Contractions came closer together, 12 minutes, then 10, then 7, each one stronger than the last. Michael kept the fire stoked, the water boiling, the generator running despite the storm's assault on the cabin. His calm presence anchored them all, his quiet efficiency a counterpoint to the raw emotion of the birthing room. It was during a brief lull between contractions, as Ellie wiped Sarah's face with a cool cloth, that the younger woman asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "Why did my father come to your diner every week? What was he looking for?" Ellie hesitated, uncertain how much James had shared with his daughter about his connection to Frank. "I think he was looking for redemption," she said finally. "For peace. Because of your husband, because he couldn't save him." So James had told her. Ellie nodded. "Partly that, but I think it was more. He saw something in me that he recognized. Grief, yes, but also resilience. The ability to keep going even when going forward seems impossible." Sarah was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "He always came home with stories about you. How you ran the diner single-handed. How you remembered every regular's order. How you fed truckers who couldn't afford to pay sometimes." She smiled faintly. "I was almost jealous, the way he talked about you, like you were this paragon of strength." "Far from it," Ellie demurred. "I just did what needed doing." "That's what strength is, isn't it? Doing what needs doing, even when it's hard." Sarah's hand found Ellie's, squeezing gently. "Thank you for being kind to him, for giving him something to look forward to each week." Before Ellie could respond, another contraction seized Sarah, stronger than any before. Her back arched, a cry escaping her lips that brought both Michael and James hurrying to the doorway. 6 minutes, Ellie noted, glancing at her watch. "And that was a big one. Things are moving faster now." The next hours blurred together in a haze of intensifying labor. Sarah moved from the bed to a squatting position, then to her hands and knees, seeking relief from the relentless pressure. Ellie stayed by her side, wiping her brow, massaging her back, murmuring encouragement as the night deepened and the storm raged on. James remained in his chair by the door, a silent witness to his daughter's ordeal. Though exhaustion was evident in every line of his face, he refused to leave, his eyes never leaving Sarah's straining form. Once, during a particularly difficult contraction, Ellie glanced over to see tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Tears for the daughter he had neglected, for the grandchild he might never know, for the endings and beginnings converging in this storm-besieged cabin. Shortly after midnight, Sarah's water broke with a sudden gush that soaked the bedding. Her contractions intensified immediately, coming barely 3 minutes apart, lasting well over a minute each. The time for gentle coaching was past. Now Ellie needed to prepare for the actual birth. "Michael," she called, "we need those clean towels now. And the hot water, the scissors, everything ready." He appeared in the doorway, arms laden with supplies. "How close?" "Very," Ellie replied, helping Sarah into a semi-reclined position against pillows. "I need to check how far along she is." After a quick examination, Ellie confirmed what Sarah's labored breathing and the pressure she described had suggested the baby was coming soon. "Sarah," Ellie said, meeting the younger woman's pain-glazed eyes, "on the next contraction, I want you to push, really push, like you're trying to push through the pain." Sarah nodded, too exhausted for words. When the next wave hit, she bore down with a primal groan that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, her face contorting with effort. "Good," Ellie encouraged. "Again on the next one. Rest between." James had moved to Sarah's side, holding her hand in both of his. His own pain seemed forgotten in the face of his daughter's need, his focus entirely on helping her through each contraction. "You're doing great, sweetheart," he murmured. "Your mother would be so proud." Sarah managed a weak smile between contractions. "She'd be laughing her head off, seeing you play midwife." She always did have a strange sense of humor. James agreed, his voice thick with emotion. The next contraction came before Sarah could reply, and she channeled her energy into pushing, squeezing James's hand with bone-crushing force. Ellie positioned herself at the foot of the bed, ready to guide the baby into the world. "I can see the head," she announced after the third push. "Dark hair, lots of it. One more big push. Sarah, the hardest one yet." Sarah gathered her remaining strength, bearing down with a cry that rose above the howling wind outside. There was a moment of impossible pressure, of straining beyond endurance, and then release. A slippery form emerged into Ellie's waiting hands, tiny and perfect, and impossibly alive. For one heart-stopping moment. There was silence. Then the baby, a boy, as James had said, drew his first breath and let out a wail that filled the cabin with new life. "He's here," Ellie announced, tears blurring her vision as she placed the squirming infant on Sarah's chest. "Your son is here." Sarah stared down at the red-faced, squalling bundle in wonder, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Hello, Frank," she whispered, touching a fingertip to his tiny cheek. "I'm your mom." James leaned forward, his face transformed by a joy so pure it seemed to erase the illness that had ravaged him. "He's perfect," he said, voice breaking. "Absolutely perfect." Michael, who had been assisting Ellie with clean towels and water, stepped back to give the new family their moment. His eyes met Ellie's over the scene, a silent acknowledgement of the miracle they had just witnessed. Outside, as if in response to the new life that had entered the world. The storm began to abate. The wind's howl softened to a murmur. The pelting snow gentled to lazy flakes. Inside, bathed in the warm glow of firelight, 4 adults and 1 newborn formed an unlikely family, bound together by circumstance, by storm, by the strange alchemy of shared experience. As Ellie helped clean and swaddle baby Frank, she felt something shift within her, a loosening of the grief that had defined her for 8 years. A realization that life continued its inexorable cycle of endings and beginnings, regardless of individual loss. In this child, named for her husband, she sensed not just a memorial to the past, but a bridge to the future. "He has your eyes," James said softly, startling Ellie from her thoughts. "What? The shape of them? Like Frank's? Like yours?" James smiled tiredly. "Family resemblance." Ellie started to correct him, to point out that neither she nor Frank had any biological connection to this child, but something stopped her. Perhaps James wasn't speaking of genetics, but of something deeper. Something forged in shared experience rather than shared blood. "Yes," she agreed instead. "I see it too." Later, with Sarah and the baby sleeping peacefully in the bedroom, Ellie found herself alone with James by the fire. Michael had gone to check the generator and assess the storm's damage, leaving them in a companionable silence broken only by the crack and hiss of burning logs. "Thank you," James said finally, "for helping bring my grandson into the world, for being here when Sarah needed someone." "I'm glad I could help," Ellie replied honestly. "She's an amazing woman. Your daughter." "She is. Stronger than I ever was." James's gaze turned inward, reflective. "I made so many mistakes with her, so much time wasted on the road when I should have been home." "You're here now," Ellie pointed out, "when it matters most." James nodded slowly. "Perhaps, but there's still so much I won't see." His first steps, first words, first day of school, his voice caught. "I won't be there to teach him to fish or drive or navigate his first heartbreak." The grief in his words touched Ellie deeply. She reached across the space between them, taking his hand in hers. "But you're here for his beginning. You've seen his face, heard his cry. That's more than many get." "It is," James acknowledged. "More than I deserve, certainly." They sat in silence again, hands still joined. each lost in thought. The fire had burned low, casting the room in soft shadows that softened the lines of age and illness in James's face. "There's something I need to tell you," he said abruptly. "Something I've been keeping from you?" Ellie tensed, uncertain what further revelation could await after all that had already been disclosed. "What is it?" James's eyes met hers, direct and unwavering. "Frank had a son from before he met you, a boy he never knew existed." The words struck Ellie like a physical blow. "What? No, that's not possible. Frank would have told me." "He didn't know," James insisted gently. "The mother never told him. They were young, barely out of high school. She moved away, raised the boy on her own." "How do you know this?" Ellie demanded, her voice sharper than intended. "Because that boy was Keith, the baby's father." The room seemed to tilt around Ellie, past and present colliding with dizzying force. "Keith is Frank's son, but that would make the baby your husband's grandson." "Yes." Ellie stood abruptly, needing space, air, distance from this impossible revelation. "This can't be true. It's too much of a coincidence." "Is it?" James asked quietly. "Or is it the universe's way of bringing things full circle? Frank's final journey led me to you. My journey led Sarah to Missoula, where she met Keith. And now, all these paths converge in that child sleeping in the next room." "Does Sarah know?" Ellie whispered, still reeling. "No. I only confirmed it myself recently, after she told me about Keith. Something about the name, the age, the hometown. It nagged at me. I hired a private investigator. The report came back just days before I left the road." James sighed heavily. "I haven't found the right way to tell her yet." "And Keith, does he know who his father was?" "His mother told him when he turned 18. Whether he made the connection to Frank Wilson the trucker, I don't know. Sarah never mentioned him speaking of it." Ellie sank back into her chair, mind racing. Frank had a son he never knew about. That son had fathered a child with James's daughter. That child, her husband's grandson, now slept in the next room, bearing Frank's name. It was too much to process, too overwhelming in its implications. And yet, beneath the shock, a strange sense of rightness began to take root, as if pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known she was solving were finally falling into place. "Why tell me this now?" she asked finally. James's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Because you have a right to know. Because that child in there is family to you as much as to me. And because—" He hesitated, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "Because I'm running out of time to make things right." The raw honesty in his voice cut through Ellie's confusion, leaving only compassion in its wake. Whatever shock or disbelief she felt was secondary to the reality of James's fading strength, his urgent need to leave his affairs in order before departing. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "It's a lot to take in, but thank you." James nodded, relief evident in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "There's more," he added, reaching for a worn leather satchel beside his chair. From it, he withdrew a small wooden box, its surface polished by years of handling. "This belonged to Frank. It was in the cab with him. I should have given it to you years ago, but—" He shook his head. "More cowardice on my part." With trembling hands, Ellie accepted the box. It was lighter than she expected, the wood warm from being near the fire. The lid was carved with a simple design mountains beneath a star-filled sky. The kind of vista Frank had loved to photograph on his routes. "He made it himself," James explained. "Told me he carved a new one every year on your anniversary. Said it helped pass the long nights on the road. Thinking of you while he worked the wood." Tears blurred Ellie's vision as she traced the carving with her fingertips. Frank's hands had shaped this box. His thoughts had been of her as he worked. It was like touching a piece of him again after 8 long years of absence. With careful movements, she lifted the lid. Inside lay a collection of small objects, a polished river stone, a pressed wildflower, a silver dollar, a tiny carved wooden heart, and beneath them, folded letters, dozens of them, each addressed to My Ellie in Frank's distinctive handwriting. Love letters, James said softly. He wrote one every night on the road, said it helped him feel connected to you even when he was far away. He was bringing them home to you that last trip. Said he wanted you to know how much he thought about you even when you weren't together. A sob escaped Ellie's throat as she lifted one of the letters, recognizing Frank's handwriting. The paper yellowed with age, but the ink still clear and bold. 8 years of silence, and now his words returned to her. A voice from beyond the grave speaking directly to her heart. I'll leave you to read in private, James offered, moving to rise. No, Ellie said quickly, covering his hand with hers. Stay, please. She couldn't articulate why his presence felt necessary in this moment, only that it did, as if the circle couldn't be completed without him there to witness it. James settled back, his eyes gentle with understanding. Ellie unfolded the topmost letter, dated just days before Frank's accident, and began to read, My dearest Ellie, another sunset from the road, another night without you beside me. The sky over Idaho was a painter's dream tonight, all purples and golds, and that particular shade of blue that always reminds me of your eyes. I pulled over just to watch it, thinking how someday, when we're old and gray, I'll bring you to this exact spot and we'll watch the sunset together. I've been thinking a lot about the future lately, about the diner, about maybe cutting back on long hauls to spend more time at home. 20 years on the road is enough for any man, especially one lucky enough to have a woman like you waiting for him. There's so much I want to do with you. Ellie, so many places I want to see through your eyes. Sometimes I think I've spent too much of our life together chasing horizons when the greatest adventure was always right there at home with you. 3 more days and I'll be back. Keep the coffee hot and your heart open. I'm coming home to stay this time. All my love, always. Frank. The words blurred as tears spilled onto the paper. Ellie clutched the letter to her chest, feeling both the acute pain of loss and the unexpected balm of connection. Frank's voice, so clear in these words, bridged the years of silence, offering a closure she hadn't known she still needed. He was planning to retire, she whispered. To stay home, James nodded. He talked about it that day on the mountain, said he was done with the road, ready to be the husband you deserved. His voice softened. His last thoughts were of coming home to you. Ellie, not of the accident, not of fear, just of you, waiting. In the quiet that followed, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and the muted howl of the diminishing storm. Something shifted between them, a completion, a passing of a torch. James had carried Frank's final moments for 8 years. Now he had passed that burden, that gift, to Ellie, and in doing so, he had freed them both. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having spent its fury during the night. Sunlight glittered across the pristine landscape, turning the world into a dazzling expanse of white, broken only by the dark shapes of trees and the thin column of smoke rising from the cabin's chimney. Inside, life had settled into a new rhythm, the needs of a newborn dictating the pace of the day. Sarah nursed baby Frank while Ellie prepared a simple breakfast, the domestic scene a stark contrast to the drama of the previous night. James watched from his chair by the fire, exhaustion evident in every line of his body, but his eyes bright with joy as he observed his daughter and grandson. Michael had gone out at first light to check the generator and assess the condition of the roads. He returned with snow crusting his beard and cautious optimism in his report. Main roads still buried, but the plow should make it through by tomorrow if the weather hold, he announced, stamping snow from his boots. Your truck's going to need some work before it's drivable again, though, he added to Ellie. No rush, she replied, surprising herself with the realization that she meant it. The urgent need to return to Pine Ridge, to the diner, to her routine, had receded in the face of more immediate concerns: Sarah's recovery, the baby's well-being, James's declining health, as they ate breakfast. A comfortable silence fell over the group, the quiet of people who had weathered a crisis together and emerged changed by the experience. It was Sarah who finally broke the silence, her voice tentative but determined. "I've been thinking," she began, glancing from her father to Ellie, "about what happens next. After—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the thought, but the implication hung in the air. James reached for her hand. "Say it, sweetheart. After I'm gone." Sarah nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "The apartment in Missoula. It's not right for a baby. Too small, too far from help. I was thinking maybe—" She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Maybe we could come to Pine Ridge, find a place there." Ellie looked up, startled by the suggestion. "Pine Ridge? It's a small town, right, the kind where neighbors help each other, where a single mom might find community." Sarah's gaze was hopeful but uncertain. "Unless you think that's a terrible idea." "No," Ellie said quickly. "Not terrible at all. It's just unexpected. Dad always talked about your diner, the people there, how it felt like a real community. After growing up in cities, following his roots, that sounds nice. For Frank, I mean, a place to put down roots." The simplicity of the request, the vulnerability behind it, touched Ellie deeply. Here was Sarah, barely into motherhood, already thinking of what environment would nurture her child best, and she had chosen Pine Ridge, Ellie's home, Frank's legacy. "There's an apartment above the diner," Ellie heard herself saying. "It's been empty since Frank died. I could never bring myself to rent it out. It would need some fixing up, but it's spacious enough for you and the baby." Hope bloomed on Sarah's face. "Really, you'd consider that?" "More than consider it. It's yours if you want it." The offer came easily, naturally, as if it had been forming in her subconscious for some time. "The rent would be reasonable, and you'd have me right downstairs if you needed help with Frank. And I could maybe help in the diner when the baby's a bit older." Sarah suggested. "I worked as a waitress through college. I'm pretty good at it." The idea of Sarah and baby Frank becoming part of her daily life, of the diner, of Pine Ridge itself, filled Ellie with unexpected warmth. It wasn't just about helping a new mother or honoring James's memory. It was about creating something new from the ashes of loss, a future neither of them had anticipated, but that suddenly seemed right, necessary even. "I think that could work perfectly," she agreed. James, who had been listening silently, cleared his throat. "There's something else we need to discuss," he said, his gaze moving between his daughter and Ellie. "Something about Frank, baby Frank's father." Sarah's expression clouded. "Dad, we've been through this. Keith made his choice. He doesn't want to be involved." "It's not about Keith's choices," James replied gently. "It's about his history, about connections none of us realized existed until recently." And so, as the winter sun climbed higher in the crystal-clear sky, James shared the final revelation, the connection between Keith and Frank Wilson. The unlikely convergence of bloodlines that had resulted in the sleeping infant now cradled in Sarah's arms. He spoke of coincidence and fate, of promises kept and circles completed. Sarah listened in stunned silence, her gaze moving repeatedly to Ellie as the implications became clear. "So Frank, my Frank, is named for his own grandfather, without me even knowing it. Life has a strange way of finding balance," James said softly, "of bringing things full circle." "Does Keith know," Sarah asked, "about the connection to Ellie's husband?" "I don't believe so," James replied. "But he has a right to know, and Frank has a right to know his heritage, when he's old enough to understand." The conversation continued as morning lengthened toward noon, plans and possibilities unfolding like the pages of a story none of them could have written alone. Michael contributed practical suggestions about the move to Pine Ridge, offering his truck and assistance once the roads cleared. Ellie described the town, the people, the rhythm of life Sarah and the baby might expect there. And through it all, James watched with the contented expression of a man who had finally completed the task that had defined his final years, the promise he had made to a dying man on a snow-covered mountain. A promise that had led him to Eleanor Wilson's diner and changed all their lives in ways none could have predicted. Outside, the sun glinted off snow-laden branches, creating prisms of light that danced across the cabin walls. Inside, 4 adults and 1 newborn formed an unexpected family, bound together by threads of loss and hope, endings and beginnings. Silence finally broken and stories finally told. The silent trucker's journey was nearing its end. But in the child who bore his friend's name, in the women who would carry his memory forward, in the connections forged through snow and silence and shared grief, James Harmon had found something he never expected, not just redemption, but legacy. And in the heart of winter, as one life ebbed and another flowered, the promise of spring waited just beyond the horizon. 3 days passed before the roads were cleared enough for travel. 3 days of adjusting to new rhythms, baby Frank's feeding schedule, Sarah's recovery, James's increasingly evident decline. The small cabin, designed for solitude, adapted to contain their improvised family with surprising grace, spaces shifting to accommodate new needs, new connections. Ellie found herself slipping naturally into a supportive role, helping Sarah navigate the early days of motherhood while Michael tended to James's medical needs. The letters from Frank remained a private treasure, read late at night when the others slept, each page reconnecting her to the husband she had lost while somehow strengthening her bond with the man who had witnessed his final moments. On the morning of the 4th day, Michael announced that the snowplow had finally reached their access road. "We can head into town today if you're all up for it," he said over breakfast. "Get supplies, check on Ellie's truck, maybe even arrange a tow if the garage is open." James, who had been growing progressively weaker, nodded from his place near the fire. "Good," he said, his voice thin but determined. "Sarah and the baby need proper medical attention. So do you." "Dad," Sarah pointed out gently. A shadow crossed James's face. "What I need can't be found in a doctor's office. Sweetheart." The room fell silent, the unspoken reality of James's condition hanging heavy in the air. He had refused pain medication beyond basic over-the-counter relief, insisting on remaining lucid for whatever time he had left. But the cost of that clarity was evident in the tight lines around his eyes, the carefully measured movements that betrayed his discomfort. "I'll stay with James while you 3 go into town," Ellie offered, surprising herself with the suggestion. "We'll be fine for a few hours." Michael looked uncertain. "The generator's running, but if it fails again—" "I know how to build a fire," Ellie assured him, "and James can talk me through anything else that might come up." After some discussion, it was agreed. Sarah bundled baby Frank in layers of blankets. Michael packed emergency supplies in case they encountered problems on the road. And by mid-morning, the snowmobile's engine faded into the distance, leaving Ellie and James alone in the quiet cabin. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, James dozing intermittently while Ellie knitted a skill she had rediscovered during those first lonely months after Frank's death. The clicking needles and crackling fire created a peaceful rhythm, broken only by the occasional creaking of the cabin settling in the cold. "You're making something for the baby," James observed when he woke, noticing the small blue sweater taking shape in Ellie's hands. She nodded. "Seemed appropriate. New life, new beginnings." "It suits you. Creating things. Nurturing." James shifted in his chair, wincing slightly. "You would have been a wonderful mother." "Ellie." The observation, delivered with such simple conviction, touched a place in Ellie's heart she had long since walled off. "Frank and I tried," she admitted quietly. "For years, it just never happened. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." Ellie's needles continued their steady rhythm. "Eventually we made peace with it, found other ways to nurture. The diner became our child, in a way. And now," Ellie's hands stilled. "Now, Sarah, the baby, they need someone." Understanding dawned in Ellie's mind. "James Harmon, are you matchmaking from your deathbed?" A glimmer of the old humor lit his eyes. "Just connecting dots that are already there. You need family. They need family. Sometimes it's that simple. They barely know me. They know enough. And there's time for the rest. James's gaze turned serious. Life is strange. Ellie, 8 years ago, I held a dying man's hand and made a promise that changed everything. That promise led me to your diner, to those Friday mornings, to this moment right here. None of it planned, all of it necessary. Ellie considered his words, feeling their truth resonate within her. Her journey to this mountain, to this cabin, to this conversation had been similarly unplanned, yet somehow inevitable, a path revealed only by walking it. What if Sarah doesn't want to stay in Pine Ridge? She asked, voicing one of the doubts that had been nagging at her. What if the apartment doesn't work out, or the town isn't what she's hoping for? Then you'll deal with that when it comes, James replied simply. But I know my daughter. Once she sets her mind to something, she follows through, like her mother that way. A fond smile touched his lips. And like me, though it took me too many years to realize it. Subtermatunum, the conversation shifted then. James suddenly eager to share stories of his life on the road, of Sarah's childhood, of the wife he had loved and lost too soon. It was as if a dam had broken, years of carefully contained memories rushing forth now that time was growing short. Ellie listened, absorbing each tale, each reminiscence, understanding that she was being entrusted with something precious, the narrative of a life coming to its close, a history that would soon exist only in the memories of those who remained. There's something I've been meaning to ask you, she said during a lull in his storytelling. That first day at the diner, when you came in, why did you keep coming back? It wasn't just about checking on me, was it? James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze turned inward. No, he admitted finally. It wasn't just that. The first time was about the promise, making sure Frank's wife was okay, that the diner was still running. But then, he paused, searching for words. There was something about you, a stillness, a presence. You moved through your grief with such dignity, no self-pity, no dramatics, just quiet strength. He shifted in his chair, leaning forward slightly. Do you know how rare that is in this world? That kind of genuine fortitude. I found myself drawn to it, needing to witness it, wondering if I could learn from it when my own time came. The honesty of his answer caught Ellie off guard. She had never considered herself particularly strong or dignified in her grief. She had simply done what needed doing, one foot in front of the other, one day at a time. I was just surviving, she said softly. No. James's voice was firm despite its weakness. You were living. There's a difference. Surviving is just not dying. Living is finding meaning despite the loss. You did that. Ellie, every day, with every meal you served, every smile you offered, every small kindness. His eyes held hers. Including those meals you packed for a silent old trucker who never properly thanked you. You thanked me in your own way, Ellie countered. By coming back, by being there, by... She hesitated, then finished quietly. By giving me back a piece of Frank I thought was lost forever. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with the understanding that sometimes gratitude requires no words. That connection can exist without explanation. Outside, the winter sun began its early descent, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. Inside, the fire burned low, needing tending. As Ellie rose to add another log, James spoke again, his voice taking on a different quality, more urgent, more focused. There's a letter in my satchel, he said. In the side pocket. Would you get it for me? Ellie retrieved the worn leather bag from beside his chair, finding within it a sealed envelope with Sarah's name written in James's steady hand. For after, he explained as she handed it to him. When I'm gone, things I couldn't bring myself to say face to face. He turned the envelope over in his hands, then held it out to Ellie again. Would you keep it for me? Make sure she gets it when the time is right. The request carried weight beyond the simple envelope. It was an entrusting, a passing of responsibility, an acknowledgement of the role James believed Ellie would play in his daughter's future. She accepted it with appropriate solemnity, tucking it into her sweater pocket. I'll make sure she reads it, she promised, When she's ready? James nodded, satisfaction and relief evident in his expression. There's one for you, too, he added, but I'd like you to read it now, while I'm still here to answer any questions. From the same pocket, Ellie withdrew a second envelope, this one bearing her name. The handwriting was slightly less steady, suggesting it had been written more recently, perhaps during one of those long nights when pain kept him awake while the others slept, with careful movements. She opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet inside. Ellie, by the time you read this, you will know most of my story, how I met Frank in his final moments, how I promised to check on you, how that promise led me to your diner and changed the course of both our lives. What you may not yet understand is why I'm writing now. When we've had ample opportunity to speak face to face, the truth is, some things are easier to say on paper, where emotions can be contained within the borders of a page, where trembling hands and failing voice won't betray the depth of feeling behind the words. I am dying. We both know this. What neither of us could have anticipated is how much living would happen in these final days of grandson born. Connections revealed, new beginnings sprouting from what appeared to be endings. There's a legal matter I need to address. My will has been updated to reflect recent developments. The cabin in Sapphire Creek is Sarah's. Of course, along with what modest savings I've accumulated. But there's another property, a small house on the outskirts of Pine Ridge, that I purchased 6 months ago. You'll find the deed in the wooden box with Frank's letters. The house needs work, but the location is good, close enough to town for convenience, far enough for privacy. I bought it thinking someday I might retire there, close to your diner, close to the one place that had begun to feel like home in my wandering life. That future is no longer mine to claim. Instead, I'd like you to have the house. Consider it payment for 8 years of meals, if you like, or recognition of the role you've already begun to play in Sarah and Frank's lives, or simply a gift from a man who found unexpected friendship at the end of a long, lonely road. Whatever happens next, whether Sarah stays in Pine Ridge or moves on, whether the connections forged in this mountain cabin endure or fade with time and distance, know this. You brought peace to a restless soul. You helped fulfill a promise I made to a dying man. You showed kindness to a stranger who had no claim on your generosity. For all of this, and for the dignity with which you face whatever life brings, I thank you, with respect and affection. James. Ellie looked up from the letter, finding James watching her with an expression both apprehensive and resolved. A house, she managed, the revelation momentarily overwhelming all other aspects of his message. You bought a house in Pine Ridge. He nodded. Seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Had this idea that maybe, when I couldn't drive anymore, I'd settle somewhere familiar, somewhere with good coffee and better company. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Life had other plans. It seems. James, I can't accept a house. It's too much. It's already done. Papers signed. Transfer arranged. My lawyer has instructions. His voice was gentle but firm. Besides, what would I do with it now? Let it sit empty. Sell it to strangers? No. Better it goes to someone who understands its meaning. Ellie was about to protest further when the sound of an approaching engine cut through the afternoon, quiet, moments later. The door burst open, admitting Michael, Sarah, and baby Frank in a flurry of cold air and excited voices. You'll never believe who we ran into in town, Sarah announced, cheeks flushed with cold and excitement as she unwrapped the baby from his many layers. The doctor from Missoula, Dr. Chen, the one who's been treating Dad. She was passing through on her way to a conference and got stranded by the storm. She's coming up to check on James, Michael added, stamping snow from his boots. Should be here within the hour. Road's rough but passable with her four-wheel drive. James's expression remained carefully neutral at this news, but Ellie caught the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his hands gripped the armrests of his chair more firmly. That's fortunate, he said after a moment. Sarah missed the reservation in her father's tone, too caught up in the day's events. She brought my medical records. Check the baby, he's perfect. By the way, exactly the right weight and length for being slightly early, and she can prescribe something stronger for your pain. Dad, something that will really help. James's eyes met Ellie's briefly, a silent communication passing between them. He didn't want intervention, didn't want to be sedated or hospitalized in his final days. He had made that clear. But faced with his daughter's hope, her relief at finding medical help, how could he refuse? That's good news, Ellie said, filling the awkward silence. In the meantime, you must all be hungry. Let me fix something. The domestic activity of preparing a meal provided welcome distraction, normality in the face of the approaching medical evaluation that would force them all to confront reality more directly than they had thus far. Ellie moved around the small kitchen with practiced efficiency, warming soup, slicing bread, arranging a simple meal that would sustain them through whatever came next. As she worked, she observed the others, Sarah nursing the baby in a rocking chair pulled close to her father's seat, Michael stoking the fire and checking supplies, James watching his daughter and grandson with the expression of such tender love it almost hurt to witness. They had become a unit. These past days, a makeshift family forged in crisis, bound by shared experience and unexpected connection. Dr. Chen arrived just as they were finishing the meal, her brisk efficiency a stark contrast to the cabin's rustic comfort. She examined James thoroughly, her expression growing increasingly grave as she noted his symptoms, his vital signs, the progression of his disease since she had last seen him. You should be in a hospital, Mr. Harmon, she said finally, packing away her stethoscope. The cancer has progressed significantly. Without proper pain management and supportive care, I'm exactly where I want to be, doctor, James interrupted gently. With my family, in a place of my choosing. The physician glanced at Sarah, clearly hoping for an ally in persuading her patient to reconsider. But Sarah, though tearful, nodded in understanding. It's what he wants, she confirmed softly. To be here, with us, with his grandson. Dr. Chen sighed, professional obligation warring with respect for her patient's wishes. At least let me leave you with proper medication, she said finally. Something for when the pain becomes difficult to manage. James hesitated, then nodded. All right, but I decide when to use it. I need to stay clear as long as possible. Of course, the doctor turned to Michael and Ellie. I'll need to speak with both of you about dosing, administration, what to expect in the coming days. The conversation that followed was clinical, necessary, and heartbreaking. Dr. Chen outlined the likely progression of James's decline, the symptoms to watch for, the medications that might ease his passing. She spoke with compassion but without false hope, acknowledging the reality they all faced. It could be days, she concluded, or weeks, if he continues to show the same determination he's exhibited thus far. But not longer, I'm sorry. After the doctor left, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. The medical evaluation had stripped away the last vestiges of denial, forcing them to confront what had been evident but unspoken. James Harmon was actively dying, and the time remaining was measured now in days rather than weeks or months. It was James himself who finally broke the silence, his voice stronger than it had been all day. Well, he said, that was bracing. The unexpected humor startled a laugh from Sarah, breaking the tension that had built during the doctor's visit. Trust you to joke at a time like this, Dad. If not now, when? James countered, a spark of his old spirit evident in his eyes. Besides, it's not as if this is news to any of us. We've just been too polite to discuss it directly. His frankness opened a door, allowing them all to speak more openly about what lay ahead. Plans were made, decisions discussed. James was clear about his wishes: no hospital, no extraordinary measures, just comfort and the presence of those he cared about. And when it's over, he added, looking directly at Ellie, I want Sarah and the baby to go to Pine Ridge with you, at least for a while, until they find their feet. Sarah started to protest, not against going to Pine Ridge, but against the finality in her father's tone. He stopped her with a gentle hand. It's all right, sweetheart. We need to be practical. You and Frank need a safe place to land. And Ellie's offered one. The apartment above the diner. Remember, it's a good start. But what about you? What about... Sarah couldn't bring herself to finish the thought. The cabin will still be here, James assured her. For visits, for summers, for whatever you want. But it's no place to raise a child year-round. Too isolated, too harsh in winter. The conversation continued into the evening, practical matters giving way to reminiscences, to stories of James's life on the road, to hopes for baby Frank's future. Throughout it all, Ellie observed the strengthening bond between father and daughter, 8 years of distance bridged in these final, precious days. Later, after Sarah had taken the baby to bed and Michael had retired to his room, Ellie found herself alone with James again. The fire had burned low, casting the room in soft, flickering light that softened the lines of illness in his face. "Thank you," he said without preamble. "For what?" "For being here. For witnessing this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the cabin, the situation, the strange convergence of lives that had brought them to this moment. "It matters, having the right people around at the end." "I'm glad I could be here," Ellie replied honestly, "though I still can't quite believe the sequence of events that led to it." James smiled faintly. "Life's funny that way, full of coincidences that don't feel like coincidences at all." He shifted in his chair, wincing slightly. "There's something else I wanted to tell you. About Frank." Ellie tensed, uncertain whether she could absorb another revelation about her husband after all that had already been disclosed. "What about him? That last day, on the mountain. He wasn't afraid." James's voice took on a distant quality, as if he were seeing not the cabin around them, but that snow-covered precipice 8 years in the past. "I've seen men die afraid, seen the terror in their eyes when they know it's the end. Frank wasn't like that. He was at peace, concerned for you. Yes, but not afraid for himself." A lump formed in Ellie's throat. "How can you be sure?" "Because I asked him, trapped there in the cab, bleeding badly, knowing help wouldn't arrive in time. I asked if he was scared." James's eyes met hers, direct and unwavering. He said, "Not of dying, just of leaving her alone. That's when he made me promise to check on you, to make sure you were all right." Tears blurred Ellie's vision. All these years, she had imagined Frank's final moments filled with pain and fear, had tortured herself with thoughts of his suffering. To know that he had faced death with courage, with thoughts of her rather than himself, was a gift beyond measure. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered. James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I should have told you years ago, should have walked into your diner that first day and said who I was, what I'd witnessed. But I was a coward then, afraid of your grief, your anger, your questions, afraid of my own guilt at not being able to save him." "You did save him, in a way," Ellie said softly, "by remembering his last words, by keeping your promise, by bringing those letters back to me. You kept a part of him alive that would have been lost otherwise." Something eased in James's expression at her words, a tension releasing that he had perhaps carried for 8 long years. They sat in companionable silence after that, each lost in thought, connected by the shared understanding of what it meant to lose someone, to carry them forward in memory, to honor their absence through how one lived. Outside, stars emerged in the clear winter sky, brilliant against the darkness. Inside, the fire burned low, needing tending, but neither moved to add another log, content to let the warmth fade gradually, like a conversation coming to its natural close. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm, James growing progressively weaker but remaining lucid, determined to savor whatever time remained. Sarah divided her attention between her father and her newborn son, finding in their simultaneous need for her a purpose that helped temper her grief. Michael and Ellie provided support wherever needed, forming a quiet partnership built on shared responsibility and growing friendship. Ellie's truck was deemed repairable, but would take time. Parts needed ordering. Work needed scheduling. The delay might have frustrated her once, this extension of her unexpected mountain sojourn. Now she accepted it with equanimity, understanding that she was exactly where she needed to be. A week after Dr. Chen's visit, on a clear, cold morning, with the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds, James asked to be taken outside. Just for a little while, he insisted when Michael expressed concern about the temperature. I want to feel the sun on my face. See the mountains one more time. They bundled him in layers, wrapped him in blankets, and settled him in a chair on the cabin's small porch. The effort exhausted him, but the expression that came over his face as he gazed out at the vast wilderness before him was worth every labored breath. Beautiful, he murmured. Never gets old. Does it, this view? Never, Michael agreed. Standing beside him like a sentinel, Sarah brought baby Frank out, properly bundled against the cold, and placed him in James's arms. The contrast was stark, new life and fading life, beginning and ending, the full circle of existence contained in that simple tableau. Remember this, James told his grandson, his voice barely audible. The mountains, the sky, the feeling of being small beneath something greater than yourself. He looked up at Sarah. Bring him back here sometimes. When he's older, tell him about me. I will, Sarah promised, tears freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. He'll know everything about you, the good and the bad, the whole story. James nodded, satisfied. The whole story. That's important. They stayed outside until James began to shiver despite the blankets, until the sun's warmth was no longer enough to counter the deep cold of the mountain winter. Then they helped him back inside, back to his chair by the fire, back to the slow waiting that had become their shared occupation. That night, as snow began to fall again, gentle this time, lazy flakes drifting down like blessings, James asked Ellie to read to him from Frank's letters. It was an intimate request, one that might have seemed intrusive from anyone else. But between them now existed a connection that transcended ordinary boundaries, a shared history that made such sharing not only acceptable, but necessary. Ellie selected a letter from early in her marriage to Frank, one filled with observations of the changing seasons, descriptions of landscapes seen from the highway, declarations of love that remained powerful despite the years that had passed since they were written. James listened with closed eyes, a faint smile playing about his lips as Frank's words filled the quiet room. When she finished reading, he opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression of profound peace. He loved you well, he said simply. Yes, Ellie agreed. He did. It was the last coherent conversation they had. By morning, James had slipped into a state of semi-consciousness, rousing occasionally but speaking little. The medication Dr. Chen had left eased his physical discomfort, but the rapidly approaching end was evident in his labored breathing, his increasing detachment from his surroundings. Sarah remained by his side, speaking softly of memories they shared, of plans for the future, of the grandson who bore the name of a man connected to them, all through an intricate web of chance and choice. Ellie and Michael took turns providing support, bringing food that went largely untouched, tending the fire, offering quiet presence when words failed. On the third day of James's decline, as evening approached and shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, Sarah beckoned Ellie to her father's bedside. He's been asking for you, she said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and suppressed tears. In his lucid moments, keep saying your name. Ellie took the seat Sarah vacated, reaching for James's hand, thinner now, cooler. The pulse beneath her fingers faint but still steady. For a while, she simply sat in silence, holding his hand, watching the shallow rise and fall of his chest beneath the blankets. Then, without opening his eyes, James spoke, his voice a whisper, but the words clear. Tell Frank, I kept my promise. Ellie squeezed his hand gently. He knows. James, he knows you did. A slight smile touched his lips, and he fell silent again, slipping back into whatever twilight realm existed between life and death. Ellie continued holding his hand, offering anchor as he navigated those final, mysterious waters. Later, none of them could have said exactly when they realized that James's chest no longer rose and fell, that the pulse beneath their fingers had stilled, that the presence that had filled the cabin with its quiet strength had departed, leaving behind only the vessel that had contained it. James Harmon, the silent trucker, had completed his final journey. The practical matters that followed Michael's call to the authorities, the arrangements for transport once the roads were fully cleared, the decisions about burial all passed in a blur for Ellie. What remained clear, crystalline in her memory, was the moment Sarah had turned to her in the aftermath of her father's death. Baby Frank cradled in her arms and asked with simple directness, "Will you still take us to Pine Ridge? Will you help us start over there?" "Yes," Ellie had answered without hesitation. "For as long as you need, for as long as you want." It was a promise as binding, in its way, as the one James had made to Frank on that snow-covered mountain 8 years before. A commitment to continue the chain of connection, of care, of chosen family that had begun with a dying man's request and would now extend into an uncertain but hopeful future. Spring came to Pine Ridge in fits and starts, warm days followed by sudden frosts, bright sunshine alternating with drenching rains. The diner's routine adjusted to accommodate its new residents, the apartment above gradually transforming from a storage space filled with memories into a home filled with life. Sarah and baby Frank had settled in more easily than Ellie had dared hope. The town had embraced them, as small towns often do, with curiosity initially, then with growing warmth as Sarah's friendly nature and willingness to become part of the community won people over. By the time Frank was 3 months old, she was helping in the diner part-time, the baby contentedly watching the proceedings from a bassinet behind the counter. The house James had left to Ellie, a small craftsman on 2 acres at the edge of town, remained empty for now, awaiting decisions she wasn't yet ready to make. Sometimes she drove out there in the evenings, after the diner closed, and sat on the porch watching the sunset, trying to imagine a future different from the one she had grown accustomed to in the 8 years since Frank's death. It was on one such evening, with spring fully established and summer approaching, that Sarah found her there, baby Frank asleep in the carrier she wore across her chest. "Thought I might find you here," she said, settling beside Ellie on the porch steps. "You come here a lot lately." Ellie nodded, acknowledging the observation without elaborating. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the sun sank toward the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Dad would have loved this view," Sarah said finally. "He always had a thing for sunsets, said they reminded him that endings can be beautiful." "He was right about that," Ellie agreed, thinking of James's peaceful passing, of the grace with which he had faced his final days. Sarah shifted, adjusting the sleeping baby against her chest. "I've been thinking," she began, her tone carefully casual, "about the future, about what comes next for Frank and me." Ellie tensed slightly, preparing herself for news of departure, for plans that would take this newfound family away from Pine Ridge, away from her. "Oh, the apartment's great for now," Sarah continued, "but eventually, as Frank grows, we'll need more space, a yard, room to expand." "Of course," Ellie said, working to keep disappointment from her voice. "You'll want to find your own place, maybe back in Missoula. Or, actually," Sarah interrupted, "I was thinking about this house." Ellie turned to her, startled. "This house, it's sitting empty. It needs people in it, life in it." Sarah gestured toward the building behind them. "It has good bones. Dad said, needs work, but nothing that can't be fixed with time and effort." "Are you suggesting you want to buy it?" Ellie asked, trying to follow Sarah's train of thought. Sarah shook her head. "No, I'm suggesting we share it." The proposal hung in the air between them, unexpected yet somehow not entirely surprising. Ellie looked at Sarah, really looked at her, seeing in her face echoes of James's directness, his clarity of purpose. "Share it," Ellie repeated slowly. "You can't keep living in that little room behind the diner forever. Ellie, and Frank and I, we need family." Real family. Sarah's voice softened. We already are family, in all the ways that matter. Why not make it official, move in here together? Fix the place up. Make it a real home. The suggestion touched something deep in Ellie's heart, a longing she had scarcely acknowledged even to herself. A desire for connection that went beyond the casual friendships she had maintained since Frank's death. What about your independence? She asked. Your fresh start, wouldn't having an old woman underfoot cramp your style? Sarah laughed softly. First of all, you're hardly an old woman. Second, independence is overrated. I tried that route, ended up pregnant and alone. Too proud to ask for help until Dad got sick. She looked down at her sleeping son. I want something different for Frank. A home with history, with multiple generations, with people who choose to be family even when they don't have to be. The earnestness in her voice, the hope in her eyes, broke through the last of Ellie's hesitation. This was what James had seen coming. She realized. This was why he had bought the house, why he had left it to her, why he had insisted Sarah and the baby accompany her back to Pine Ridge. He had been setting the stage for exactly this moment, for the creation of a new family, from the fragments of those that had been broken by loss. It would need a lot of work, Ellie said, looking at the house with new eyes. New roof, updated kitchen, probably rewiring. Is that a yes? Sarah asked, hope brightening her face. Ellie smiled, feeling something settle into place within her, a piece of her heart that had been adrift since Frank's death. Seeking harbor. Yes, she said simply. It's a yes. Sarah's answering smile was radiant. Dad would be pleased, she said. He always hoped we'd find our way to this. Did he tell you that? In his letter, the one he left for after? Sarah paused, then continued more firmly. In his letter, he said he hoped I'd find the courage to build a new kind of family, that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose rather than the ones we're born into. Ellie nodded, thinking of the letter James had left for her, of his hopes for connection between her and Sarah, of his belief that something good could emerge from the tangled threads of their shared history. He was a wise man, your father, she said. In the end, Sarah agreed, when it mattered most. Baby Frank stirred against his mother's chest, making the small mewling sounds that preceded waking. Sarah rocked him gently, murmuring soothing words until he settled again. There's one more thing, she said after a moment. I've been in touch with Keith, Frank's father. Ellie's breath caught. Oh, how did that go? Better than expected. Actually, once I explained about the connection to your husband, about how our paths had crossed through Dad, he seemed genuinely interested. Wants to meet Frank. Sarah glanced at Ellie, gauging her reaction. How would you feel about that, about him being part of Frank's life, even in a limited way? It was a complex question, one that touched on Ellie's own unresolved feelings about the son Frank had never known existed. But as she considered it, sitting on the porch of the house that would soon become their shared home, watching the sunset paint the world in golden light, the answer seemed clear. I think it's right, she said. Frank would want his grandson to know his father, whatever their relationship might be. And I'd like to meet him, this piece of Frank's life I never knew about. Sarah's relief was evident in the relaxing of her shoulders, the softening of her expression. Thank you for being so open, for making room for all of this complexity in your life. Life is complex, Ellie replied simply, messy and unpredictable, and full of strange coincidences that don't feel like coincidences at all. She smiled, echoing James's words from those days in the mountain cabin. Full of endings that become beginnings, if we let them. As if in agreement, baby Frank opened his eyes, blinking up at the two women who would shape his world, his mother by birth, his grandmother by a series of connections so unlikely they could only be called fate. He yawned, tiny fists stretching upward, then settled back to sleep, content in the knowledge, however unconscious, that he was exactly where he belonged, above them. The first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. Below, in the town of Pine Ridge, lights winked on in windows, marking homes where other stories unfolded. Other lives intersected, and here, on this porch, a new family took shape born not of traditional bonds, but of promises kept, of grief transformed, of the human capacity to find connection in the most unexpected places. The silent trucker's journey had ended, but the ripples of his passing continued to spread outward, touching lives, altering courses, creating possibilities that none could have predicted when he first walked into a small-town diner on a snowy Friday morning and ordered coffee. Black. Ellie looked out at the gathering darkness, feeling not the familiar weight of solitude but the warm presence of companionship, of shared purpose, of future yet to be written. Tomorrow there would be decisions to make, plans to formulate, work to begin on transforming this empty house into a home filled with life. But for now, this moment was enough, this quiet acknowledgement that endings and beginnings were not separate events, but parts of the same continuous cycle, like the seasons, like the setting and rising of the sun, like the silent trucker's final journey home. "Well," she said, rising from the porch steps with newfound energy, "shall we go look inside, start making plans?" Sarah stood, adjusting baby Frank against her chest. "Lead the way," she said, smiling. "We'll follow." And together, they climbed the steps and crossed the threshold, leaving the door open behind them to welcome whatever came next.